So, Canto 5, Chapter 24, verses number 15, 16? 15 through 19. 15 through 19. So this is long prose. We're not going to recite the long prose. The focus is now on Sudarshan Chakra. Subterranean heavenly planets. Where there's darkness, but the light we're hearing from the previous verse is coming from Sudarshan Chakra. Read 14. They, the residents of these subterranean heavenly planets, live very auspiciously and do not fear death from anything but death's established time, which is the effulgence of the Sudarshan Chakra of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the Sudarshan disk enters those provinces, the pregnant wives of the demons, although they live their lives with auspiciousness, there's demons. The pregnant wives of the demons all have miscarriages due to fear of its effulgence. My dear king, I shall now describe to you the lower planetary systems one by one, beginning from Atala. In Atala, there's a demon, the son of Mayadanava, named Bala, who created 96 kinds of mystic power. Some so-called yogis and swamis take advantage of this mystic power to cheat people, even today. Simply by yawning, the demon Bala created 3 kinds of women, known as Svarini, Kamini, and Punchali. The Svaranis like to marry men from their own group. The Kaminis marry men from any group. And the Punchchalis change husbands one after another. If a man enters the planet of Atala, these women immediately capture him and induce him to drink an intoxicating beverage made of a drug known as Hataka, parentheses, cannabis indica. Ooh. This intoxicant endows the man with great sexual prowess, of which the women take advantage for enjoyment. A woman will enchant him with attractive glances, intimate words, smiles of love, and then embraces. In this way, she induces him to enjoy sex with her to her full satisfaction. Because of his increased sexual power, the man thinks himself stronger than 10,000 elephants and considers himself most perfect indeed. Illusioned and intoxicated by false pride, he thinks himself God, ignoring impending death. That was one verse. And then 17. The next planet below Atala is Vitala, wherein Lord Shiva, who is known as the master of gold mines, lives with his personal associates, the ghosts and similar living entities. Lord Shiva, as the progenitor, engages in sex with Bhavani, the progenitoress, to produce living entities, and from the mixture of their vital fluid, the river named Hataki is generated. when fire being made to blaze by the wind drinks of this river and then sizzles and spits it out, it produces gold called Hataka. The demons who live on that planet with their wives decorate themselves with various ornaments made from that gold, and thus they live there very happily. Purport. It appears that when Bhava and Bhavani, Lord Shiva and his wife, unite sexually, the emulsification of their secretions creates a chemical which, when heated by fire, can produce gold. It is said that the alchemists of the medieval age tried to prepare gold from base metal, and Srila Sanatana Goswami also states that when bell metal is treated with mercury, it can produce gold. Srila Sanatana Goswami mentions this in regard to the initiation of low-class men to turn them into brahmanas. Sanatana Goswami said, Yata kanchinatam yati kamsyam rasavidanata tata diksha vidanina dvijatvam jayate nirnam. Translation. As one can transform kamsa, or bell metal, into gold by treating it with mercury, one can also turn a low-born man into a brahmana by initiating him properly into Vaishnava activities, unquote. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness is trying to turn mlechas and yavanas into real brahmanas by properly initiating them and stopping them from engaging in meat-eating, intoxication, illicit sex, and gambling. One who stops these four principles of sinful activities and chants Hare Krishna Mahamantra can certainly become a pure brahmana through the process of bona fide initiation, as suggested by Srila Sanatana Goswami, paragraph. Apart from this, if one takes a hint from this verse and learns how to mix mercury with bell metal by properly heating and melting them, one can get gold very cheaply. The alchemists of the medieval age tried to manufacture gold, but they were unsuccessful, perhaps because they did not follow the right instructions. End of purport. Now that was 17, and we're going to go to 19. That's sufficient? Yes? Sufficient. Structure of the universe is very fascinating. It would be natural to speak about this alchemy process that Sanatana Goswami mentions in Hari Bhakti Vilas, because that's relevant and pertinent to our lives. It's also, I think, nice to speak something about this fascinating description of Vedic cosmology. Just share something that I learned in the last few weeks about Vedic cosmology. It turns out that Vedic cosmology and Chinese cosmology very closely match. And it's not only Vedic cosmology and Chinese cosmology, but world cosmology. In Sadaputta's writing, Astronomy and Cosmology, he wrote a book. He was requested by Prabhupada, and he followed the instruction. It took him years. Study the 5th canto and design a model for the planetarium. That was an instruction from Prabhupada. So he worked on it. And one of the steps was in that research was this uh, Cosmology, Astronomy and Cosmology book. There's a chapter in that book where he is showing that cosmology from around the world has similar elements, like Mount Sumeru, like the trees surrounding Mount Sumeru, the big tall mountains surrounding Mount Sumeru, and circular islands and oceans. I mean, we don't see circular islands and oceans anywhere. We don't see it. But cosmology of different places. So and he has drawings and gives the descriptions, ranging from Sweden to Africa to Southeast Asia to South America, American Indians, Russia, Siberia, the whole map, the whole globe. It's not one to one, but very similar elements. Cosmology around the world historically has similar elements. And the scholars before him that studied this subject they said there's three possible solutions or explanations. Why? One, genetically, humans are just wired to make cosmology look like that. Not so likely. Two, chance. Not so likely. Three, at one time there was a culture and a body of knowledge all around the world that produced similar cosmologies. They didn't like it, but it was most plausible. Two more references, one that came recently. There's one of our Chinese devotees has a friend that's a writer and a PhD researcher and has other friends that are very scholarly, and it's become a thing, as far as what I can understand, in amongst a certain group of Chinese intellectuals today to take a look at traditional Chinese teachings and values and so forth, and see how is there some comparison between our Chinese and the Vedic version. Short, yes. I was forwarded an English translation of a Chinese, like an article published by one of these PhD professor people, specific to cosmology. And somebody had gone to the trouble of studying Vedic cosmology, and they knew Chinese cosmology. And there's a different Chinese name for Mount Sumeru, but there's Mount Sumeru. There's a different Chinese name for this, not just seven by number, 7 islands and oceans surrounding that Mount Sumeru, and it's just different than the Vedic nomenclature, but it's the same model. Same model. Now, how did that happen? So, if you're a scholar, you say there's 3 possibilities, and one is least desirable. Then one other, something I heard just this past week, Prabhupada speaking in Los Angeles, 74 or something like that, in Canto 6, Chapter 1. It was somewhere in there in the verse, the Jamila story. But, the structure of heaven and hell, because that was the question between the Vishnu Dutas and Yama Dutas. What's Dharma and what's the destination for sinful and pious people, was the question. So Prabhupada spoke. He started the class, towards the very beginning of the class. Why is it that all around the world there's different names for the days of the week, but all around the world it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, ending in Saturday? They have different names. Here's the names in Hindi, here's the names in Bengali, here's the names in English. And different cultures have different names. But why is it starts with Sunday and it ends with Saturday? Why is it? No, it's not entirely like that, but largely like that. And then Prabhupada said, anyone can answer. And said, I asked our PhD, Swarup Damodar, and he didn't know either. And it's a cosmology answer. The cosmology answer is Bhuvar Svargaloka. And in the Swarga realm, just closest to the Bhu Mandala region is the sun, Sunday. And above that is the moon, Monday. Now that's in our English language, and whatever the language is. And then the last one out is Saturn, which is Saturday. And then the other ones are the vertical dimension of the universe. All over the world. I mean, there's exceptions, but largely that's the procedure. So as far out as these descriptions of this section as the subterranean heavenly planets sounds really wild. And if you're a scholar, it's mythology or whatever bad name they give it. But we don't take it that way. It's an actual description. And one other thing that I've learned about Vedic cosmology, I had a misconception, and it was a puzzling misconception. And the misconception that I had was those lower 7 planetary systems are the hellish planets. That's a misconception. The hellish planets are below the 7. And it gives if you read it, look at it carefully, you read it carefully. The lower section it comes at the end of this chapter 26. This is chapter 24. We're going down, so it's the 7 lower. Below the 7 is a very thin slice. The vertical dimension of the universe, the hellish planets take up very little space, just above Anantashesh. And it lists 28 and says there's actually millions of varieties of hellish planets. And so these 7 lower planetary systems are not hellish planets. They're lower they're subterranean heavenly planets where there's facilities for sense enjoyment. That doesn't exist in hell. It's not facilities for sense enjoyment. There's a very interesting comparison found in Ramayana in comparison to the Bhagavatam, where Ravana, in Valmiki Ramayana, Ravana decides to challenge Yamaraj because he's on this tour of challenging everybody. He hears that there's somebody powerful, so he goes to where that somebody powerful is and challenges them. So he hears Yamaraj is powerful, so he decides to go visit Yamaraj and, have combat with Yamaraj. And the description of what he experiences is pretty scary. But part of what he experiences is a place where it looks like people are enjoying. It doesn't say that's the subterranean heavenly planets. It's kind of like mixed up. It's hellish suffering, and then enjoyment, and then again hellish suffering. So exactly where that is in comparison to Vedic cosmology from the Bhagavatam, maybe one of the Sri Vaishnava Acharyas have commented upon that. I'd be curious to find out if they have commented upon that. But if you go in the vertical dimension down, down, down from Bhumandala, there's enjoyment. And we just read, there's piety. Or they engage in pious activities. And then the very next verse is they're Rakshasas. So their enjoyment looks like, the enjoyment of a heavenly planet. It even says in some of these sections, the facilities for enjoyment even surpasses heavenly planets in some cases. So like there's lots of, it look like the fruits of piety, facilities for enjoyment, but they have this sense of eternality, whereas in the heavenly planets they don't. At least in Brihad Bhagavatamrita we read, they're quite anxious about, they also have to die, because people in this world, they're not so anxious. Some are, but in the heavenly planets their knowledge is greater, so their enjoyment is greater, but also their awareness of the temporary nature of that enjoyment is also greater. And at some point they're going to get kicked out, and there's some anxiety. We read about it in Brihad Bhagavatamrita. And the point is, in these lower planets, they don't have that anxiety. They have a sense of eternality. They even have a sense of being God, some, at least. And then there's specific features in each one of the seven. So now all of that is kind of like just some sharing. Now to this, the two, there's the place in general. There's the illumination of Sudarshan, the light. This light of the sun doesn't go there. It's darkness. But there's artificial light, or the light from the hoods of Anantashesh, and then at the time of dissolution of that lower, at the end of every day of Brahma, here comes Sudarshan Chakra, and people know what it means. It's they're getting wiped out, because until then they don't get wiped out. They live for a long time. Looks like it's going to go on forever, and then smash. So in Atala, just go over it again. Maya Danava. Took me a while of researching to find out who is Maya Danava anyway. Because Maya Danava is mentioned in Mahabharata, Mahadanava is mentioned in the Bhagavatam, Maya Danava is mentioned in Ramayana. Who is Maya Danava? And Maya Danava reveals something about himself to Ravana, because Ravana married one of his daughters. Mandodari is his daughter. And there, according to Ramayana at least, there's two other sons. And those two other sons were both sons were killed by Vali, Dundubi, and Mayasura, something like that. Mayasura. Vali killed Mandodari. So his name was Maya. Not Maya, but Maya. And Maya was the son of Kashyapa and Danu. Kashyapa had 13 wives. And we hear a lot about two of them, Aditi and Diti. And the demigods and the demons born from Aditi. But another of the 13 is Danu. And Danu's offspring were called Danavas. And Maya was one of their offspring. And he did austerities, etc., etc. He got a benediction for mystic powers, so he was quite a mystic. And according to here in Srimad Bhagavatam, it's not just it doesn't exactly match, a one-to-one match with Ramayana. It's a different narration. So how do we, as Vaishnavas, process? There's this narration over here, there's that narration over there, so how do we process it? Standard is not always, but standard is different days of Brahma. In different days of Brahma, there's this Maya Danava, and another day of Brahma is that Maya Danava. That's one way to process the different explanations. So one of Mayadhanava's sons was Bala, who created 96 kinds of mystic powers. Now, created, we should understand, it means he manifested, not that he's not God. He can draw powers from the Supreme and then manifest those powers of the Supreme that others can't manifest or had not to that point in time manifested. But 96 different mystic powers, and some of those mystic powers are producing different types of women, and those different types of women populated this Atala planet, and men that go there become enticed by these different types of women, and they think the way that it's described. So that's something that goes on in Atala. Below that is Vittala. Vittala is an abode where Lord Shiva resides. Have you ever been asked, I'm sure you've been asked, have you ever been asked, what's the position of Lord Shiva in relation to Krishna or Vishnu? And, the worshippers of Shiva, where do they go? And things like that. So I was asked to speak on that topic, and I didn't catch this one, that the abodes of Lord Shiva are multiple, and here's one of those abodes. In Vittala. And he resides there with his Bhavani, Bhava and Bhavani. And there's things that happen there that we'll go over quickly. But I want to touch on this. Different abodes of Lord Shiva. For that matter, there's different abodes of each of the demigods. Have you ever wondered, I one time wondered, where does Yamaraj live? Where's the abode of Yamaraj? And it turns out he has 4 different abodes. One, he presides in the hellish planets. That's one of them. Then he presides over Pitriloka, which is above the heavenly planets. The hellish planets. So there's 2. Then another of the abodes of Yamaraj is he's one of the protectors of the directions of the universe. Digpals. So he has 2 abodes as Digpals. One is on Manasotra mountain, that circular mountain upon the wheel of the chariot of the sun rides on it or above it. And at the very top of Mount Sumeru, there's the Digpals, and he's one of them. So this I learned. I was into finding out the answer to the question. The devotee that's responsible for the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, Antardweep, helped me. And so there's 4 abodes of Yamaraj. There may be more, but that's the list of 4 that was confirmed. And Lord Shiva, so you have to add to my list, one of the abodes of Lord Shiva is here, Vittala. Without going through where the other abodes are right now. One of them is Vittala. And there's something that happens for the benefit or the enamorment of the residents of Vittala. That is, the emulsification, the mixture of secretions when Lord Shiva and his wife unite. It produces, I'll just read Prabhupada's purport, it creates a chemical which, when heated by fire, can produce gold. So some of the residents of Vittala apparently know how to do that because they have gold. and with the gold they try to become enjoyers. And of that gold. And then so the final is alchemy. There was a period of time in European history, specifically, as far as my research has told me, specifically in Germany, there was a period of time when there was a great fascination. I heard Satchidananda Swami describe this too, because he's German. There was a period of time in European history where German scholars there's a whole field, alchemy, and they were experimenting, trying to produce gold by this alchemy process. Now, Prabhupada writes they failed because they didn't know the proper process of combining. And whether they failed or they produced some gold is not the essence. It's just acknowledgement in modern history that there is such a thing of alchemy. And there are those that know. And maybe you've heard Prabhupada speak on the process of alchemy within the Vedic culture. Here's Prabhupada's explanation. I heard it in 2 different lectures, and I listened to it several times to make sure I got it right. There are yogis that know how to do the alchemy thing. And it requires being able to swallow mercury. Those that know a little bit about mercury, you know that it's poisonous. Like parents don't allow their children to touch thermometers because in the thermometer is mercury, and if they drink mercury, they're dead. So don't leave thermometers near children. But yogis, they know how to not just hold it in their throat, but swallow it. And then in the morning, Prabhupada's explanation, when they pass water, they pass that water over bell metal and it becomes gold. That's Prabhupada's explanation. That's how, at least, one of the methods by which yogis use alchemy, to mixing mercury with bell metal to make gold. And apparently there are people in Vittala that know how to do that. And they utilize some fluids. There isn't a description of how they obtain that fluid, of the mixture of the emulsifications from Lord Shiva and his wife, or his consort. But somehow it makes heat. And with that heat, together with base metal, gold is produced. So there's opulence in Vittala. And, demons like opulence. I mean, heavenly people like opulence. And demons really like opulence, like Ravana. He loved gold. Very fascinated with gold. Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu loved gold. People like opulence. It's a material. It's now you see it, now you don't opulence. It's not what real opulence is. But they're attracted to it. And people in Vittala are attracted to it. And they have a means of getting it. At least some residents there know how to. And then comes the Sanatana Goswami verse from Hari Bhakti Vilas, which explains that just as alchemy is a method by which base metal can become gold, so also by the proper procedure, diksha procedures, then an ordinary person can become a qualified brahmana. And it's an important verse for us, for the propagators of Krishna consciousness. And, there are people that don't like it. Just like anything you do, anything that goes on in this world, it's a place of duality, and some people like it, some people don't like it. Some people think it's wonderful, some people think it's awful. And the Smartas think it's awful. And the Vaishnavas think it's wonderful. There's tantra or procedure, and Hari Bhakti Vilas is where this is referenced. It's a tantra literature. We discussed it in the life of Sanatana Goswami last night. And one of the literatures he wrote was Hari Bhakti Vilas. And it's in a category of Tantra, which simply means procedure. Vedic texts have tantras. Now, tantras often is used in a negative sense. It's like people that do black magic, tantric arts. But it's an art. It's misused, that's one, and there's properly used, that's another. So everything that a Vedic Brahmana does, there's sections of the Vedas that teach how to do that. That's Tantra. It's a tantric section. And there's Vaishnava Tantra that's within the Vedas. And our worship is drawn from that. And this Diksha is part of that, is part of the Tantra. So that's why it's in Hari Bhakti Vilas. It's Tantra, or how-to, for Vaishnavas. How to do everything for Vaishnavas. And there's a how-to for those that aren't Vaishnavas. Just like, for example, here's a really easy one. For example, those that are not Vaishnavas, they also observe Ekadasi. And Vaishnavas observe Ekadasi. And those that are not Vaishnavas, they have Tantra. This and that and the other thing. On this Ekadasi, that Ekadasi. And you get what you get. You get necessities of life for those who are not Vaishnavas. And those who are Smartas, they know what that Tantra is. And they do this and that so they can get stuff they want. And then there's Vaishnav. We don't follow those to get this and that. We're trained to follow Ekadasi to worship Vishnu. And whatever do's and don'ts, vidhis and nishedas, is just for that purpose. Smartavya satatam vishnur vismartavya najatu chit sarva vidhi nishedhashur etayor eva kinkara. It's just to remember Krishna. And we follow vidhis that facilitate remembering Krishna. So we're not interested in alchemy. There are persons interested in alchemy. There's modern science. There's tantrics. There's yogis, and there's Vaishnavas. And the Vaishnavas are interested in transforming an ordinary person into a Vaishnav, to a first-class Brahmin Vaishnav. That's what we're interested in. Prabhupada's saying the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is taking that up. So it is important for us. It's not imperative, but it's important to know the scriptural basis for what we're doing. Not wishful or imagined or manufactured or something. It's scriptural. What we're doing has a scriptural foundation, and it's part of the Vedic text, what we're doing. So it's good to know what the Vedic text source is for what we're doing, and then to do it nicely. We're not really interested in going to Vittala and learning how to make gold. We're not interested. We're interested in what Sanatana Goswami is pointing to. So let's see if there's some discussion. It's 8:25. I got here a little bit late, sorry about that. We have a hand up in the back. Do we have a portable microphone? Look at that. Behind you.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I was going to ask you about the alchemy process. My children and I were reading the fourth canto and in one of those verses, the same thing was shared. How, the process of alchemy, and in one line said how mercury was turned into gold. And the question is, so I've shared with you, my son is interested in science, right? So his immediate response was, the first time I had heard him say that was no. And then my response to him was, we don't know how it was done. I mean, I remember from your previous lectures what Prabhupada had said. So I said, this is what Prabhupada says, we don't know how to do it. So he heard and he accepted that. But I'm thinking, as he's growing to grow up, how can I, as a primary teacher at the moment, maintain this curiosity to science, but at the same time, the faith in the scripture to not be shaken because some things are not in line with what we see and hear in our current textbooks?
Since you listen to Prabhupada's lectures, I'm sure you are familiar with how he deals with that. And how, one of the ways, a standard way, is there's so many things that we don't know. And you can say no, but a more honest is you don't know. And on what basis do we know? We know on the basis of sense perception. And then he would go into, different examples of what we don't know through sense perception. How does our fingernail grow? How do we digest food? There are many things that we don't know through sense perception. How many planets are there in the sky? And we don't know. How many fish are there? We don't know. Species. How many, so there's so many things we don't know. So to say no, because it's not within our experience of sense perception, is not a wise position. You can say, I haven't perceived it, that's fine. So your specific question is how to not have faith in a primary student be shaken when they hear something that's not part of what they experience. It's do the mind expanding thing of how do we know something. And if you try to know something through your direct experience, there's a lot of things that you're not going to know. And what you do know is mistaken. What you think you know needs to be brought into proper focus in light of that which is actual knowledge. So it comes to what's the pramana topic. Sense perception, reason, logic, and hearing. In language that a primary student can understand, a primary age person can understand, explain those three. And this is why we invest value in that which comes through hearing. And from what source do you hear? Then comes the next. From aparusheya shabda. Oh, is it, you can ask, is it possible that there's a person that's not contaminated with the defects of a conditioned soul? Is God contaminated by the defects of the conditioned soul? Is it possible? And if it's possible, then that is shabda, that's sound that's worth hearing. But it's because it's coming from a place that's not contaminated by the defects of a conditioned soul, we may not be able to experience it. In course of time, it's possible to experience it by revelation. Then Prabhupada goes down the path. How do you know what existed before you existed? How do you know who your father is? You know that one. It says through authority of your mother. Then somebody might argue, well, you do the genetic evaluation, you can find out who your father isn't, but you can't determine who your father is. There's one way to know who your father is. You ask your mother. And similarly, so for those things that are beyond our experience, we consult the Vedas. And even those things are within our experience, we consult the Vedas. Because the understanding and the evaluation of that is from a perfect person. That's why we need guru, not just Shastra. So it's a good question. It's a good topic to cover. And, they can say whatever they're going to say, like, I have to think about it, or I don't like it, or, they can strike their mind and their hearts in different ways. But it's one of the methods of nourishing faith is, why do we accept that there's a logic? I have a father, he has a father, he has a father. Who's the original father? Whoever the original father is, that's God. That's logic. It's not a proof. You haven't experienced. But we accept. And then not just because it's logical, it's stated in the scripture. And that's confirmation for us. That's our method of knowing things. And it's a paradigm shift for, a primary student. Because, we're accustomed to the other two.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
One of
She's a teacher, by the way. That's where this is coming from. Not only a mother, but a teacher. Go ahead.
another question that came up was you spoke about the Maya Danava with some using the yoga power that he had and he could create women. So that's very intriguing. Like how he once these as I previously that there are 6 ways that a soul can come to create one. The same way.
Yes. Well, here's a rookie explanation of that question. So I'm going to put your question on pause and go to the wives of Kashyapa. How are they able to produce all the species? From one human, another human species. Varieties of species. That's a standard explanation in the 3rd canto Bhagavatam and 4th canto. The answer is they're invested with power to do that. Now, those not invested with that power to do that can't do that. Those invested with the power to do that can do that. And where does the power come from? It comes from the source of all power. Prajapatis are given a power, just like Brahma is given a power to create. We all create something, but we can't create a universe. He's empowered. He has certain qualifications that entitle him to that empowerment, and he builds a universe. So now, it's not Mayadanava, but the son of Mayadanava named Bala, he did. He didn't create, he just by mystic power, one of his mystic powers that came from the source of the Yogeshwara, was a power to do this. It's something that we can't do, but it's something that he was given a power to do. He didn't create jivas. It's varieties of species, like the varieties of species that make up the universe that we're familiar with. And here's, categories of women folk that have this nature, that nature, the other nature. It's just the modes of nature. That's what mystic powers are. It's just manipulating Prabhupada's explanation. It's just manipulating laws of nature in a subtle way. That's what mystic powers are. It's something material, and they know how to manipulate the laws of nature in such a way they can do something that others cannot do. That's the mystic power. And one has to receive it. Now, how he doesn't give the explanation, but he received. You can't do something without receiving something. So he was given a power. 96 different kinds, and this is one of them. So it's not in contradiction. Doesn't give a detail of, by this, that, or the other method of the four ways in which living entities are manifest. Doesn't go there. But he didn't create something some other way. It's just how the mystic power. That's my understanding. Again, it's a pedestrian kind of understanding. There's not some detailed explanation like that, but it corresponds with what the Prajapatis do. You have something? Yes. Here comes the microphone.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I'm just wondering this Prithvi Loka, called another name is Mritu Loka.
Marcha.
Marte Loka, Mritu Loka,
Yeah.
The people
Okay.
died. And we just read that description about the Jambu Deepa, and at that time looked like very good and everything is very nice and very decoratively. We whatever the Deepa, 7 islands, we read that one and looked like very nice place. And it's still now I'm just wondering that talking about the Swargi Loka and then go to the Atal Bital and down Loka in between. Here is the problem, everything. But most of not that much sense enjoyment things, and not like Hallis and not like the other Swargas. And this is look like extraordinary place.
Yes, it
for
is.
what purpose? It's
What purpose?
yeah.
That's the question.
Yes.
Why? Living entities. Its short answer is desires of living entities, and desires of living entities, in principle, is separate enjoyment, and then the variety is according to the guna, and then driven by karma, which is driven by time, but it's guna. It's the association with gunas. There's all variety to provide the fundamental separate enjoyment. So how many varieties are there for separate enjoyment? And there's in categories. And so there's facilities. The simple example that Prabhupada gives is, supposing somebody wants to have a place to live. It's very common. So they can only choose the place to live according to their means. They can live in a big place, they can live in a medium place, they can live in a small place. They may even have lots of means and live in a small place. But your choices are restricted. And then when you have the means, then there's variety within the means. That's guna. So it's guna and karma driven. But what's the why is wanting separate enjoyment. And then all the different facilities are there for a separate enjoyment. So why? Krishna could say no. But no, he doesn't say no. He facilitates. There's consequences for that separate enjoyment. That goes along, that's part of the package. But the why is because of desiring separate enjoyment. And the special thing about this middle planetary system, where we are right now, is in the human form of life, is the reminders of this isn't really what happiness is. And, the means for making a solution to that problem. That's human mission. No, you have further question. So that's the why.
Yes, Maharaj, just one thing.
But take the microphone because they're
Yeah.
remote people.
Sometime they say demigods also wants to come to the
Yes,
Martya Loka
it's in this
to
fifth
perform their
canto.
devotional service. Still, we are feeling here and we are saying that this place is not good and nothing. That's the reason I'm asking the question. Why?
That's what you're
this
asking.
place?
Oh, well, there's a specific section. I'm trying to remember where it is. I just read it. A specific section in the Bhagavatam that speaks to that. Because the residents in the heavenly planets, some, not all, but some, their lights are on, and this is all temporary, and it's not. It doesn't bring. There's too much opulence here. There's too much of a tendency to the enjoyer of that opulence. The problem is not per se the opulence, but opulence invites that tendency. It stimulates the tendency to be the enjoyer of the opulence. And therefore, they aspire for this place because it's not so opulent. And the second explanation is, and specifically, there's association of sadhus available. Now, it's pretty special to find sadhus, but the sadhus that promote the purpose of life is, at least according to this particular section of the Bhagavatam, it's more available here than there. So those two reasons that makes this place more advantageous and sought after even by demigods. Anyone else?
Couple online.
Okay, let's go.
This is from Snehavalli Mataji. Is Mano Sotra mountain same as Loka Loka mountain?
Say it again.
Is the Mano Sotra mountain same as Loka Loka mountain?
No. Loka Loka mountain is beyond Manasotra mountain. Manasotra mountain is the mountain upon which, or above which, the chariot of the sun god travels. And then Loka Loka mountain is the boundary where the light of the sun stops. It's two different places.
Follow-up question from Mataji. The same term, Hataka, is used for a drug and for a gold. Is it just the same term for different objects?
I don't know because I'm unfamiliar with the terms, but nice question.
And then lastly, does the river Hataki contain some intoxicated product?
Haritaki?
No, Hataki.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a comment. Yes, it's what it says directly in the purport.
Yeah, that's it. She
Okay,
just want
that's
to
it.
clarify.
Anything else? Anyone else in the room? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Srila Prabhupada Maharaj.